Welcome, everyone, to the Masculine Wilderness podcast. I am Tom Perez. I am the founder and CEO of Epic Project. This is an ongoing conversation that we've been having now for a couple of years, primarily aimed at shedding light on how men can show up in the world in the best version of themselves. And I've said this before, I'll say it again because it's true today as it ever was. We can't do that as men. We can't show up as healthy and constructive men without the leadership, the wisdom, the insight of women. And today will be an example of that. I'm really excited to bring to everybody into this conversation a friend that I met just about almost exactly a year ago. Megha Parekh is the one of a handful, if not the only, female executive vice president in the NFL, executive vice presidents in the NFL. And she is with the Jacksonville Jaguars. We'll talk a little bit more about the really cool stuff that's happening there that Epic's been proud to be a part of. But I wanted to just give you a couple minutes, Megha, to just tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get to where you are? What brought you all the way to the bitter cold Jacksonville, Florida, as you were describing just a minute ago?
So first of all, Tom, thank you so much for having me on. And I really appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation. If I was going to, at a very high level, explain what actually brought me to Jacksonville, it's Thomas, men like you believing in me, encouraging me, and giving me opportunities to do things that I never even necessarily thought might be within reach for myself. So I have been in Jacksonville now since 2013. Prior to coming to Jacksonville, I was in New York working at a law firm called Proskauer in their sports group. One of the transactions I had the opportunity to work on was the acquisition of our team for our current owner, Shad Khan, and his family.
I did not know.
And so about a year after the transaction closed, they asked me if I would come to Jacksonville to be their in-house counsel. And I remember I was about 3.5 years in at the firm at the time, had tremendous opportunities, thanks in particular part to the managing partner there. And I remember when they offered me the job thinking, I don't know that I'm really qualified for this or prepared for this.
Hmm.
And a friend of mine in the league, who's the current CFO of the Cleveland Browns, I also worked on that acquisition, said to me, Megha, if I think that you can do the job and they think that you can do the job, the management team here some of them came from the New Meadowlands Stadium Company, which built the Jets and Giants Stadium. And I remember him saying to me, if we all think that you can do it, I don't know why you're cutting yourself off at the knees. Go ahead and go take the opportunity, and we'll all be here to help and support you, but take the opportunity. And so now here I am. But if you'd asked me, 15 years ago, while I was working in New York at a law firm, if I'd be in Jacksonville, Florida, complaining about the 60-degree cold weather, I would have told you that's not possible for me.
Yeah. Wow. So 2013. Oh, has your role with the Jags has expanded since then? So it was legal counsel, and then over time it's grown. What's the kind of in a just give us an overview of the scope of your work with the organization right now.
So one of the reasons why I've stayed as long as I've had is that I've been lucky to have opportunities to work on a number of different projects. So shortly after I arrived, stadium construction started on the pools and the video boards. And so as the lawyer, you get the opportunity to work on the contract, which just gives you a foot in the door on any number of things, and you get to see how the various parts of the organization work together. So I'm very fortunate to be working with our team overseeing our current stadium renovations, which is almost a 4-year construction timeline. We're just about a year in.
It's a little bigger than just the scoreboards, right?
A little bit bigger than the scores, which are still the world's largest outdoor boards. But this project's well underway. We are, of course, approaching the end of the 25 season. We'll be playing in Jacksonville in 26, away for 27 in a location to be determined, and then opening up the fully transformed stadium in August of 28 here in Jacksonville. So I'm really enjoying being able to work on that because you get to literally see, right, the fruits of the work that everyone's doing coming to life and being constructed. And then also have technology, HR, and IT. But I'm a little bit guilty of finding everything interesting and wanting to help everybody. But that's what good lawyers do, right? You're just now in house with all of your clients all around you, as opposed to being at a firm with external clients.
Yeah. Do you still see yourself in the day-to-day work that you do now as a lawyer, or does it feel bigger than that?
I still see myself as like a scrappy 16-year-old kid sitting on the Jersey Shore, so that's probably a difficult example. But when it comes to sort of viewing what I do professionally, I'll say that I enjoy. It's not necessarily bigger than being a lawyer. It's that I enjoy being able to see the business side of the organization. That's one of the main reasons why I wanted to go in house. Right, is be able to support overall business operations, business strategy beyond being a outside counsel advising somebody. But I also, my hope is that we have an organizational culture where everybody feels like they are part of a team and we succeed and fail together. And so,
Yeah.
whether that's on the field or on the business side, I hope that I'm part of like bigger in the sense of I hope that I'm part of a group of people that all sees themselves as being there to help support each other and achieve the business's goals.
Yeah. That's so great. I love the story. I've told it just internally. I've told it with friends and whatnot, just of how our paths crossed. It's been, like I said, almost a year. I was invited to come to Jacksonville last January. I can't remember the exact date. It was in January, and literally, we talk about the bitter cold. I walked out of the airport in Jacksonville, Florida, where I had never been before, and there was snow on the ground. It was that one week, but we sat on a panel together, and we're talking about exploitation, and really trying to highlight and promote a lot of the really cool stuff that's being done in and around the city of Jacksonville with the JAGs, with the mayor's office, with the sheriff's department, a whole bunch of different stakeholders. And what just impacted me the most is, as you and I, and there were two other folks on the board with us as well, that were um, fielding questions from the audience about what we're doing. I think I said to you at one point, I said, I feel like you've read my journals, because there's just such a common kind of perspective on this. So let me um, let me kind of go there, and I have a series of questions that I kind of want you to run through. And but you, one of the things that we've tried to do for years with Epic, because our focus is on men and cultivating healthy communities of men. There are, I call them, iconically masculine places in our culture. And you live every day in the midst of one of the most obvious professional male sports, right? Um, and so I just think your perspective, the things that you see, are probably maybe things that other people don't see. So let me just start with this question. So you're, like I said, you're one of the few, if not the only, women at the executive VP level in the NFL. Um, so the question is this: what has that vantage point revealed to you about how masculinity is shaped, and or yeah, just how is it shaped within that professional sports culture? Like, what do you see that, like, when you're there? And I know you don't roam around the locker room, that kind of a thing, but like when you're around that culture, what are the things you see? And these are fully formed men that are, that you're engaging with, but like, what are you seeing about the how? But they're also young men. Like, how are you? What do you see about masculinity in that culture? Like, what comes to mind? Let's start
So
there.
from the vantage point that I sit at, and I'm not naive to the fact that in my head I'm 6'5", but I'm probably 5'2", 110-pound woman, right, walking around that building. Um, but from my perspective, I've been overall, in general, been given a fairly warm reception
Mm,
by everybody in leadership, from ownership to the coaches that we've had over the years, the GMs. Yeah, we have an EVP of football ops, our team president, and when you talk about sort of the shape of masculinity, from the shoes that I walk in, the high heels that I tend to walk around in because I am so short that it creates sort of a funny dynamic at times, I think that one of the reasons why they've been so welcoming to me is that my presence of being there is a complexity, right? Sort of as you articulated. It's not that common to have that many female lawyers, let alone that many female lawyers working at a NFL team. The fact of my mere presence in the building I think also allows them to assert their own right to be complex. So I don't fit in the narrative necessarily in terms of what you would expect, which just then also gives other people a license to say, okay, if our lawyer is a female child of immigrants from India who went to Harvard, worked in New York, and then came to Jacksonville, Florida, and listens to Bon Jovi and Kid Rock, then maybe I don't need to fit into whatever stereotypical mold might also exist for men.
So can you give me
And
an example of what that looks like? Like with,
sure, so I think that people would be surprised to learn that if I had to count the number of people in my office who have cried that have been male or female, the answer is that the number of men is equal to, if not higher than the number of women. I think it creates space for people to be themselves when they realize that, yes, there are stereotypes attached to particular roles, but we don't have to live within those. And
yeah.
that opens up space for everybody, men and women, to not necessarily have to be so rigid or feel like they have to conform to whatever prescription might exist in terms of what other people feel most comfortable with. And so that's allowed me to then have, and not just me, but others too, right? A lot of conversations that people may not otherwise expect or think are happen, they happen. And it's because we welcome people for whatever it is that they bring, not for whatever it is that we expect them to be.
So I'm hearing that from the outside and thinking all of the what appear to be rigid, kind of masculine stereotypes in reality like don't actually exist, or at least there's in the culture that you're describing in that environment, there's actually some freedom to not like play into that.
That's exactly right. So I think it's, of course they exist, right? They exist. Stereotypes, of course, exist, right?
Yeah.
The fact that people aren't expected to fulfill them and that you can welcome different perspectives, including those that might make you uncomfortable or might be anomalous, might be unique.
Yeah.
I think that that's really critical. But if you're talking about driving the best human performance, right, whether that's on the field or on the business side, that comes from, I think, figuring out what actually drives people, and not the same things drive everybody. If you're prescribing a one size fits all solution, you're not going to get the best performance out of people
Yeah.
across the board. And so having a more nuanced approach, I think, really does lead to better business outcomes overall.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had the privilege, 2 or 3 times over the years to be with an NFL team in a locker room prior to a game. I was asked a few times to give a pregame chapel, so it's obviously a little different than you walking around as the VP. But um, that experience for me was somewhat similar because all of even the bravado that we assume is part of that culture. Like it was almost completely non-existent when you're with a bunch of young men that are about to go out on the field to compete at the highest level of sports. And what struck me in some of that, so some of the conversation and interaction with these athletes, is these are obviously highly gifted, really well paid professional athletes, but they're also young men who are keenly aware that they're one accident, one injury away from all of it going away, or one failed performance, or like it's just there was a lot of vulnerability. I think he's like you said in that space. Um,
Well, and I think that if I don't want people to look at me and make judgments, then I have to make sure that I'm doing the same thing the other way,
yeah,
right? So whether it's the stereotype of, oh, you're an athlete, so maybe you're not the most intelligent, that's just not true. And it would be wrong of me to show up in a room and accept to be taken at who I am as opposed to what people think I am or what people
yeah,
think I should be, and to not do the same for other people, right? And so that's where we can all show up better for each other.
yeah. That's saying a lot because you're a Harvard educated attorney, right? I mean, in a in a football locker room, um, like that's saying something. I think let me turn this just a little bit. So we what we're saying here is that a lot of the stereotypes, they don't actually exist in the day to day world, or at least there's room to not play into that. But in your experience, do you still see traces of the misogyny, the bias, all of those things that are commonly associated with this culture? Like, do you still see that? And if so, like, how does it play out?
Yeah, I mean, but I see that not just at the team. I see that in general, right? So this is, I think, a broader conversation of
Yeah,
we do have challenges that exist that people tend to be uncomfortable talking about at times. And this is where I think the value of discourse or the value of conversations like this becomes so important, which is that you can have conversations about difficult topics, and that's how things get better. They don't need to become arguments. They can be disagreements, they can be debates that then lead to hopefully a greater consciousness on both sides as opposed to becoming an argument. That said, is there misogyny? Yeah. But that I would say is more narrow, frankly, for the most part. It is rare to find somebody who it exists, but it's rare to find somebody, and my hope is that people generally agree not to tolerate men who outright hate other women or just think that they don't belong or shouldn't be there. Um, is there a difference in perspective where people just may not realize something and then have their eyes opened because it's not their lived experience? Sure.
yeah,
And so this is, forgive me for the example, but it's right in my mind. But I was talking to a colleague yesterday, we were having a really frank, honest conversation just about, topics like this. And I said, if men got their periods, there would be tampons in every single bathroom, everywhere. Period, full stop. This wouldn't be a conversation that we'd have. But somehow it is like an uncomfortable conversation that we are having while budgeting because generally the decision makers haven't had to think about the topic. I don't think it's coming from misogyny. I think it's coming from you haven't had to think about the topic. So
right,
let
right.
me not be so frustrated that it doesn't exist, but let's have the conversation and then see where we come out. When I
Yeah,
first started, one of the first conversations that I had as we were reviewing our employee handbook was I asked the question of, can we make parental leave equal? So maternity and paternity leave to me ought to be the same because the way that I think about it, if I want to have equal help at home, then companies have to give men equal time for leave. I don't know how else I can expect that. And
yeah,
that was an easy one, easy conversation to have. It wasn't when I had first started, but again, you don't necessarily need to come at everything from a place of, hey, there's a nefarious intent here. I do think that a lot of times maybe the question just hasn't been asked or someone hasn't had to think about it. And
yeah.
so let's have that conversation.
That was my question. Like, what changed? It was just somebody realizing, hey, we actually haven't talked about it, or was there something culturally that caused that shift, or just
I honestly think there wasn't necessarily a big cultural shift as at the time of the acquisition. There was just an opportunity to relook at how things had been done, right? Which generally happens when you have churn in an organization. And I think
yeah,
there is some value to some churn so that people listen for even like I find it now a decade in, anything that I've written or put in place, I obviously would I would hope think makes sense. And so I welcome people to challenge it because I'm going to think that it makes sense,
yeah,
but I need somebody else's eyes and ears to tell me if it's not,
yeah,
or if
yeah,
there's a different way to do things or a better way to do things. And that's where I really do think there's value in people of all different types with all different types of experiences and not just based on their demographics in coming together and working. But I was in an environment where they made me feel comfortable enough to even have these conversations or ask these questions. And that's really the best that I can ask for. I don't ask for a quote unquote perfect culture. I
right,
ask for a form in which we can have these conversations and challenge me to prove my business case about why these things are actually good and will lead to better outcomes,
yeah,
as opposed to just saying, oh, things ought to be different or things ought to be all equal.
yeah. That what's the ethos, I guess, that you're describing, because it really feels like it's part of the cultural air that you're in the midst of. Did that have that always existed, or was this something that you had the fortune to kind of be a part of that transition? Like, was it there when you got there with the organization?
So I got there a year after the deal closed, and I will say this about our leadership, which is that if you have a good idea, a good concept, I don't think that anybody in this organization cares what you look like and what your job title is. It is a matter of what can you contribute.
Yeah.
Now, we need to make sure that we create space, especially for junior people, to feel comfortable speaking up and saying things. But I will tell you that, and it happened within the last month, anytime an employee comes to me with a serious employee issue, my perspective is we are doing something right. Because I think in organizations that say that they have no issues, you probably do. They're just not coming to light. But
Right.
when people feel comfortable coming to us and saying, here is a challenge that I have, it's sensitive, it's difficult, can you help? That to me means that we're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And it's a privilege that people trust you with some of their most challenging or difficult moments to handle them. It is. It means that they're willing to be vulnerable around you, and it does take a specific environment, I think, to elicit that from people where they feel comfortable doing so. And that to me is how you then get meaningful change.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you, or to what degree in the course of your work, are you consciously aware of the idea that you are uh, a woman in, and you can push back on this if my perspective is wrong, but you are a woman in a male dominated industry. Like, like, to what degree does that play into your experience?
Yeah, so not to go back to what I just said, but Tom, I feel like I'm a woman in a male dominated world at times,
Yeah.
right? Like that, and that's just the case. And so, yes, I show up with that. And I think, call it what you will, but I'm a little bit of a Pollyanna where when I remember when I was a little kid and I was watching Bon Jovi on the stage and people would say, oh, like, do you want to marry Bon Jovi? I never think, no, I want to be Bon Jovi. Like, and I don't know if you can see the guitars
I
behind me,
do that. Yeah.
but that's just how, that's just how my parents raised me, right? Where
Yeah.
it's not that it's, hey, cause you're a little boy or a little girl, like you need to do these things. And there was some of that for sure. But there was also the encouragement of, but okay, like if this is not typically what little girls do in terms of playing the drums, but you want to play the drums, sure, here's a drum set. And so when I show up at work, I think of myself as not necessarily being defined by, oh, I'm a woman showing up at this workplace. I think I'm a lawyer. And that is how I approach the job.
Yeah.
Which means that there are times when I'm genuinely surprised by the things that I hear about me. So I remember, rewind a decade, I moved from New York where I had floor to ceiling windows in my office to Jacksonville where we're in the stadium, which is an awesome place to work, but there are no windows. I was like, I'm in Florida. I need to go outside. Like I need sunlight. I just work better and I think better. And I remember a coworker came up to me and I was a couple years in and he said, there's a rumor going around that you sit outside to work because you want attention from the players. And Tom, talk about like the most like
Oh,
stereotypical thing. I literally put my sunglasses on. I walked away from him and I was like, thank you so much for telling me that. I appreciate it because I need to be aware of these things. And I went and I cried. I cried because I was so disheartened because it never even occurred to me that someone would think that. Like I'm sitting here thinking, I know that human beings perform better when they move more during the day, and I'm one of them.
yeah.
I know that human beings perform better when they get sunlight. They just do.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm sitting out here thinking I'm a plant, like watering myself and growing. And this is what people are thinking. I remember, it's like, and those things are said and they're said about women. It happens when I will walk away and have conversations one-on-one with male coworkers where people will say things. And so I don't necessarily like think about those things in advance. I am genuinely surprised when those things come up.
Yeah.
And to me, that's really where men can help women because you can either say nothing in those moments or you can be somebody who stands up and says, stop saying that about her or
Yeah.
that's not true. And that really, it's like, I'm so grateful to the one coworker who even told me about that. But part of me wishes that like that just dialogue didn't even happen anymore. It's disheartening when I hear it. It really is because like, I'm here trying to do a good job, trying to help people. And then you hear things like that and you're like, I wish that people weren't socialized in a way where that was even a thought that they had.
Yeah. Yeah. But it was uh, what I'm hearing is you were appreciative of that coworker from at least bringing that up, and your tears weren't because he said it, but because others were talking about it that way. Is that?
Yeah, look, or it's more that like sometimes there are things they're just unfair. And I'd say that's one of them.
Yeah.
Because I
Yep.
don't think that if a male coworker was sitting outside, someone would have said, oh, he's trying to get attention from the
Yeah.
players. And when you see two men walk away or two women walk away, no one's talking about whether or not there may be something more going on with them. And it's not just me, by the way, this happens to other
Yeah.
women at work too, where all of a sudden it's like, oh, those two have a really close relationship. Okay, but like check yourself on that and what you even mean by that and what you're saying, because what I don't want and what will send, I think, everybody backwards is if all of a sudden there is some sort of taboo about men and women working together. And you saw this a little bit after Me Too, unfortunately, where it now certain men say that they are uncomfortable or afraid of what's going to mean if I'm in the office with my door closed with a woman, or what's it going to mean if I'm really closely mentoring a woman. I'm like, that's not the point. Like, that wasn't the point of raising the awareness that there's bad actors out there. The point was actually to put sunlight on it and
Yeah.
not let the conspiracy of silence continue, not to further separate men and women in the workplace.
Yeah. Yeah. What have you learned now? This many years into it, like what have you learned about um, how to cultivate those kind of healthy relationships, like with male coworkers? What does that look like for you? What are some good lessons for you?
And this is where I'm so appreciative of the environment in which I work, Tom, and actually the conversations that we've had. So our first training after Me Too, which I gave about harassment and discrimination, been doing it since I started. For the first few years, nobody really said anything during them, right? They just absorbed the information. The trainings were challenging because there weren't a lot of really good examples to use, and people didn't want to talk about some of the other dark stuff. The first training that I gave post Me Too was a spectacular failure, because I went into that training thinking that, oh, people know that this is going on.
Right.
I've certainly experienced it in the workplace, at every workplace that I've been at. Um, and they'll absorb it and they'll understand, and they'll all be engaged and motivated. Yes, this is a watershed opportunity where we can cut out this sort of bad behavior in the workplace, create a safe environment for everyone. And nobody talked. And somebody said something to me during it of like, well, that doesn't happen here. And I just remember, like, I was stunned, because I thought, my job is to help inform and educate people about this. And I did not do a good job that day. I didn't.
Mm.
And so I went back and I reflected. I'm like, what am I doing wrong? And I realized that there's two things. One is that I kept on thinking of it as there's a handful of bad actors out there, and then there's everybody else. And the reality is that I think there's a handful of bad actors. There's people who are subject to their actions. And then there's a really broad group in the middle who thinks, okay, yeah, maybe I know some of this is going on, but I'm not doing it. I'm not subject to it. And actually, I don't really know how to help. And I'm uniquely situated in my role to see more of these issues than other of my colleagues would. And I said, I need to stop being frustrated that they don't understand. And I need to take a step back and actually educate them about what's going on.
Uh-huh.
And then the next step is, okay, what can you do to help? And so we've now totally transformed that training, and it is reframed as, look, this is about creating a healthy work environment where everyone can do their best work. And this training isn't about men are bad or
Yeah.
men are doing the wrong thing. And I'm especially sensitive to it given who the speaker is, but it's that this is about protecting the team, protecting you, and helping people protect each other, whether that's someone who's a victim or someone who might be about to do something that they shouldn't do, because that mistake takes a toll on that person too. And that training is far more effective, because I think it opens up the door to everybody to say, we're not saying that men are bad or that women are like sensitive and shouldn't be in the workplace. It's that here's the problem. And actually, none of us want this. None of us want to be in a workplace where this happens. And here's how we can help each other from preventing that from happening. And
Yeah.
that resonates with people far better than saying, don't do this, and don't do this
Right.
because we don't want to get sued.
Right. It's less about crisis intervention and more about health promotion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's perfectly said. I really like that. Yeah.
Yeah. What does conflict resolution look like for you in that environment with especially with like male employees? Like how what have you learned from that?
So I will say that, like, I'm a very avid learner. And so I still, as much as I can, at least once a week, try to listen to some course on professional development. And a lot of them have been about conflict resolution. So
Yeah.
not shockingly, growing up in New Jersey, and let alone, then getting trained as a lawyer, I probably have a little bit of a like stubborn element to my personality. And what I've learned over time, both through this professional development and also through crisis counseling, which I do as a volunteer, is that, and frankly, this is just a good first principle of negotiations. You want to start in terms of like influencing people, you have to start by understanding what motivates them, what's important to them, and what they value. And so to me, when you have a conflict between any two people, you have to start there. And you have to make sure that both people are starting from the premise of the other person's not an idiot and they're not wrong, right? Like you
Yeah.
can't do that. If someone disagrees with you, it can't be that you're going to insult them into somehow getting convinced to whatever your perspective is. And so I will try, and especially when emotions are high, and I've done it. And there have been some rooms where I've been sitting in, whether it's just me and four fairly angry men thinking, please don't let this go south in some way,
Yeah.
trying to get people to express their perspective, see the other person's perspective, and then figure out where are their misunderstandings. Because more often than not, there's a lot of assumptions being made about intentions that might not exist.
Yeah.
And what can we do to get to the better result? May end with us all hugging it out. And I'll tell you that there's been times when it has. And that makes me so happy. So happy.
Yeah.
Or it may just end with, hey, we're going to make sure that we're not destructive to one another. And that's okay too.
That's a
Right?
win. Yeah.
It is. But really, there is no substitute for taking the time to learn about somebody, which then creates empathy. And then once you have empathy and predictable behavior, you build trust. And trust is the hallmark of a high functioning organization.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I've thought my whole life, I have been influenced by this image of professional sports, professional athletes, what that world is like. Gosh, probably like every guy I've ever known, there were all those moments where like, I want to be a professional athlete when I grow up. I grew up in Chicago. I grew up going to the Bears games. Like my dad literally knew members of the Hallis family, and as anyway, so I grew up in that environment, and I idolized professional athletes, and I've seen just over the years, like it has that culture, and it's not just the NFL, it's Major League Baseball, basketball, soccer, like it has an enormous formative impact on, especially on young men, if we're talking about male athletes. Um, and there's just that high level of cultural influence. What, in your opinion, given the NFL's enormous cultural influence, I think we could agree that it's pretty significant. What do you see as its either, like, I don't know if we call it responsibility or more opportunity that the organization, the institution, the league itself has in shaping healthier models of masculinity for young men? So, like guys like me, like my 10-year-old self, I have a 10-year-old grandson. And so he's literally like what I was, um, you know, back in the day. So, like, what do you see as opportunities that organizations, not just like the Jacksonville Jaguars, but the National Football League in general, what are some of the opportunities they have for shaping and influencing some of those norms?
Well, and I think that we talked this a little bit specifically as it related to human trafficking. But what I see is that we have the opportunity to be an amplifier to raise awareness regarding issues and to help spread positive messages. So, when we can talk a little bit about what we did specifically in Jacksonville, but looking back at this season, when Neeland very tragically died by suicide, that opened up an opportunity to either gloss over that news or engage in really meaningful conversations about the dangers of suicide and how
Yeah,
you might be able to notice the signs and help somebody.
yeah,
And the suicide rate is actually highest amongst men. Suicide is at one of those illnesses that's actually more heavily male. And
yeah.
I think the challenge there is that it is difficult, or men are discouraged from talking about their feelings and about what they can do about it, and are also more likely to be alone more often.
Is
And
that
so,
in the wake of that particular loss? That
well, that's just so everything that I just described is just true, right?
right,
In
right.
terms of who suicide affects. And so the question is, okay, this news happened. What are we gonna do about it? We can ignore it and say that, well, that just happened. That's an outlier. Or as an organization, we can say to our people, we acknowledge that this happened. If you're struggling, here's resources. If you're
Yeah,
impacted by the news, here's resources. And we just started a partnership with an organization called Be Nice out of Western Michigan that actually is come in, and we had this set up earlier in the year before the news even came out, but we have this resource in place. They come in, they've trained all of our staff in general, about 20 of our staff more specifically in how to notice if someone's struggling, invite them to have a conversation to that, challenge them to seek help, and empower them to go take advantage of that help. And to me, it's like, yes, we have a core business to run, but again, all of these outside events impact people. We should have resources and programs in place to help educate them, talk about it. And that I think allows people to then actually more healthily re-regulate their nervous system, process their emotions, and focus back on the work.
Yeah. Yeah. You talk about that partnership. The reason we connect is because of another partnership, well, a whole bunch of partnerships in Jacksonville with the project we're doing. I've talked about it a little bit, but can you talk about from your perspective, um, what's happening with the poster campaign, the work we're doing with the mayor's office, the sheriff's office? Like, how did that how did that how did the JAGs and more particularly you get connected with that, and what is that project look like from your perspective?
Sure. So the mayor's office reached out just about 15 months ago, and they asked the question of what are you guys doing as you train your game day staff as it relates to awareness specifically for human trafficking? And we do, of course, train our staff in see something, say something, right? So that may relate to any number of different things that you might see that just seem abnormal. Please report it so that the appropriate party can respond.
Right.
And it prompted the conversation of, okay, is there anything specific relating to human trafficking, which I am not necessarily as familiar with and was surprised when I moved to Jacksonville to realize that it's such a hub of it. I didn't realize that was such a significant problem in this city in particular. Um, and so we were, of course, let's see if there's something that we can do in our training for all of our game day staff. So that's everybody from our first JAGS full-time staff to ticket takers, ushers, security.
Yeah.
What can we do to help these people if they notice something? Here are resources that you can undertake to help the situation and escalate it to the appropriate authorities, whether it's JSO or whomever. And so we were reviewing our training. There's a local organization called Rethreaded that was helping us and the mayor's office with that.
Mhm.
And these posters that we've now put around the sports venues in Jacksonville, so it's not a uniquely Jaguars challenge, right? This is applicable to all the sports and entertainment properties here in town and the venues that we have. What can we do to give people a little bit of information about human trafficking, which is apparently quite prevalent here in Jacksonville, and resources that we can connect them to? What I think was unique about this is that thanks to our friends at the NGOs and Rethreaded in particular, we were able to create two different types of posters. So if you go to the airport, typically you'll see these, which is, hey, if you notice a problem, if you want to report human trafficking, if you're a victim of human trafficking, here's resources that are available. We have two. One is more along the lines of if you are a subject of it,
Yeah.
here's
So like
a
they're parallel
here's how
camp.
you can go to the authorities to get help.
Yeah.
If you're somebody who is also a buyer, or if you know someone who's a buyer, here are resources for you, right? So recognizing that it's not quite as simple as there's good person and bad person here, right? It's that both of these people need help in different kinds of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Was there at any point hesitancy or pushback organizationally on even talking about and acknowledging the existence of something that's really uncomfortable, really ugly, like from within the organization?
Honestly, Tom, and I know that this is going to sound a little bit crazy, but no, not one person pushed back. Not at our facility manager, not when we reached out to our local sports teams, even minor league baseball team, a soccer team, a hockey team. Not one person said, no, we think this is controversial and we don't want to be a part of it. And I
Yeah.
think so much of that came from the approach of human trafficking is a human rights problem. This is not a problem for women. This is not a problem caused by men. This is an us problem. There's
Yeah.
an us in this community problem. What are we going to do to come together to fix it? And there was widespread buy-in from our
Yeah.
partners across the board on that front.
Yeah.
And of course, led and driven by the city and by the sheriff's office.
Yeah. I remember, I think you said in that panel discussion, you talked about framing it as a human rights issue, and it's a human, not a man or a woman's
Yeah.
issue. It's
It's a crime. This isn't political. This isn't about, men being bad. This is something that we have collectively as society deemed as a crime. What can we all do to
yeah,
limit the impact and the prevalence of this crime? And
yeah.
we're in it together. Not any one of us is going to solve it by ourselves. Whether that's the police, the NGOs, or the sports teams, of course. We're here to amplify and raise awareness, and we're in the best position to do that and to make a difficult conversation more mainstream.
Yeah. I have heard many stories over the years in doing this work of organizations just in the business community, that are reluctant to talk about it because there's the assumption, it's a faulty assumption, but the assumption that if we talk about it, we're acknowledging the fact that it's somehow happening in at our business, hotels, that sort of a thing would be one example of that. What do you think? It's kind of hindsight, but in hindsight, what was it about specifically your organization, um, that was unique, that when the opportunity came out, when the mayor's office reached out to you, it was, I hope I wasn't putting words into your mouth, but like it was a no-brainer that you would do. Like what existed prior to that, that organizationally, that allowed you to be able to go, yeah, of course, we want to be a part of this.
I think that there are times people are afraid to talk about what they perceive to be more esoteric concepts. But let me tell you, one of my favorite things about our organization is that we have conversations about and we believe in ethics. And
Hmm.
so when you are an organization that wants to do everything above board, wants to be a healthy organization, expresses values, but wants them to be more than something that we hang on the wall and something that people actually live by and what governs their behaviors and how they treat one another. The mayor's office reached out and wants to see what we are doing to help people to be more aware about a crime. And it's a crime that happens to rise in frequency when there's large events. What's controversial about that?
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
Not a thing. There's not a thing that like, to your point about it being a no-brainer, like, I can't think of anything that I said in that statement when it's framed that way that someone could object to and say, "Why would we do that? Why would we get involved with that?" But, like,
Yeah.
there's no uh, and if there is, like, I welcome it in terms of what is the weakness in my argument, like, that's how people learn, that's how you get better. You don't learn by listening to yourself in an echo chamber, right? Like, I want anyone to challenge that notion, but the mayor's office has reached out and asked what we can do to help train our staff to be more aware about something that's a crime. Like, absolutely. And if we were talking about knives getting into the stadium or backpacks being dropped or the prevalence of drones being used for mischievous activity, we had no problem engaging in any of those topics. Why should this
Right.
one be any different?
Right. Was yours the lead voice in this when the opportunity presented itself, or
Not necessarily the lead so much as it was just the first because I was the person to whom the mayor's office reached out. But again, that's, if you want to do anything well, me pounding my chest isn't the way to get it done. It's to build consensus and um help other people see the value of it. And it was championed by our organization.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The the part of all of this that we're talking about that I'm really proud of, just from the standpoint of what Epic has contributed to it, is the obviously our focus is the men, and the posters targeting men, feature, I think there's either 10 or 12 videos, 5 or 6 from women who have been trafficked, and 5 or 6 from, I think it's 5, from men who have bought sex acts. And so it's a real raw, and these are just literally cell phone videos. We asked friends in the survivor community to say, what do you want to say to men that are involved in this or considering it? And it's a really raw, unfiltered. You want to hear the reality of it, both from the buyer and the bot. And it's a really compelling and uncomfortable thing. So I'm really proud that we got to be a part of that. What do you think is the potential for that kind of strategy to be replicated?
I think that it requires, and let's talk about the experience of the buyer. I'm not trying to minimize the pain of the bot.
Yeah,
But when you're looking at the buyer, I can't sit here and look at somebody and just shame them because that will drive that conversation into darkness.
yeah,
What I
same.
want to understand is, listen, you maybe made a mistake, you maybe made a bad choice. Let's talk about what behaviors, what culture? What led to you making that choice? What led to you thinking that this is okay? And is this even something that's making you happy and fulfilled in the end? And
Yeah.
what's a different lens through which we can look at it? You're not going to get people to change their behavior by making it really cold. They're just gonna, like, bundle themselves up further. Like, you want people to come to the table and have the conversation. To me, you gotta make it nice and warm so that
Yeah.
they shed those layers of shame and guilt and they can have a conversation. Because to me, and this goes back to sort of what we'd been talking about maybe 20 minutes ago, you know who I think is gonna be the most impactful person to explain to men why being a buyer is not a good thing? Other men.
Mm.
And, like, yes, of course, women, and specifically women who are bought, can share their experiences and raise their voices, but or people, I should say, who have been bought. But at the same time, other men who aren't buying, why why are you not? And why wouldn't you? And to do that and to have that conversation in a way that doesn't have shame, but says, "Let me show you a different, better way."
Yeah.
That's, to me, how you build honest, lasting change. And sometimes that means learning how to not define people by their worst moments or their worst mistakes.
What role, like from your vantage point with inside professional sports, you mentioned shame, which I agree with everything you just. This was the part where I felt like you were reading my journal uh, when you started riffing on that. But in terms of inside of sports, what kind of damage does that unquestioned, I don't know, unfettered shame play? Like, what kind of damage can shame play in terms of just like athletic performance?
Oh, I think that if someone is shamed, they are much less likely to ask for help, much less likely to get help. And then not only will their performance on the field decline, but that to me is a recipe for getting somebody down a really bad path towards unhealthy coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
Because healthy coping listen, everyone's got emotions, everyone's got challenges that they face. The ones that you're able to deal with in the sunlight without shame, that's where you find your healthy coping mechanisms. The dark path, where people are likely to fall victim to things like substance abuse or worse, right? Like things
Yeah.
like self-harm or suicide. To me, that's a function of shame. And
Yeah.
that comes from, it's and again, I will say that, like, my first instinct, especially as a lawyer, may be to form a judgment about something, but to really check those and say, do I actually know where this person's coming from, what their motivation was? That doesn't mean that you got to tolerate everything. Just to
Right.
be clear, like,
Right.
you can have empathy for people without endorsement. We had to terminate an employee who had been accused of sexual assault. And I still talk to him to this day. He was termed about 5 years ago because I remember thinking when we terminated his employment, I am worried that you don't have any sort of support system in
Mm.
place. Now, the police decided not to proceed with that allegation. He's obviously got his version of it, and we've talked about it, but I don't like when people get thrown away
Mm.
because they may or may not have made a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so true to our experience in talking with active sex buyers now for 13 years. There's the whole. Wow, you said it. People don't deserve to be defined by their worst moments. It feels really counterintuitive when you're talking about something as just devastating as sexual exploitation, sexual assault, because there's so many layers there. But what we found with in dealing with men, the ones that are inflicting this violence and all of that is they're uh, they're extremely, it feels counterintuitive, but they're extremely vulnerable to shame. And we don't show up shaming them. The shame already exists in the
Right.
moment. And what we found is just corroborates what you're saying. What we found is that if we show up and add more shame and talk about how bad this is and what a bad person they are, that you're right, it disappears. It goes underground. And yeah.
Well, let me be clear. I'm also not saying that we should tolerate, that there
Mhm.
shouldn't be punishment, that there shouldn't be accountability.
Yep.
All of those things should happen because you're not going to help anybody by tolerating repeated bad behavior
Right.
either. You're not going to help anybody by tolerating, resorting to unhealthy coping mechanisms, but you're not going to fix it by just piling on further shame, right? It's a matter of addressing it. And so the person in particular that I was speaking about, like, it almost makes me emotional at times to think about it because 5 years later, he's passed those accusations, and he's now looking at going back to school to become a counselor himself so
Wow.
that he can help other people that have gone through difficult situations like he had without a support system,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially from family and friends. And it's, to me, that's a sign of progress, right? That's a success out of a really dark situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you agree with the idea that empathy, true, authentic empathy and accountability are not mutually exclusive?
No, I think they have to go together. I
Mm,
do, because I don't think that you're gonna get people who bow up. If you don't show any empathy, and if you act like somehow all human beings aren't complicated and aren't fallible, you're gonna get people who either deny or run away.
yeah.
But they're not gonna come to the table and say, "Okay, what could I have done better?" That's where, like, even I think that there's tremendous value in taking accountability, owning something, and accepting punishment when in whatever form that might take,
Yeah.
because that allows people to move on.
Yeah. What?
But I, not to get too philosophical, but I do, as I think about these things, and you have a buyer and the bought, and you think about what justice is, right? There's the law, and the law falls far short of justice on the really holistic, meaningful level. Like, to me, that the justice comes from the offender uh, expressing empathy for the victim and understanding what they've done and being truly repentant based on that, and from the victim finding healing and ultimately the ability to forgive, but forgiving because holding on to that poisons and anger is only hurting yourself. It's not helping the other person.
Yeah. Yeah. What does empathy and accountability look like on an NFL sideline during a game?
What do you mean by that?
I'm just saying, do those qualities play out in that moment of high level performance? Like what does that look like? Somebody makes a mistake, you know, quarterback throws an interception. Like do you
Sure.
like what
So
does that look
so
like?
you tell me, Tom. Like, I feel like, because I know that you have kids, people are motivated differently. There's
Yeah,
some people that are motivated by really tough coaching. There's other people that aren't, and that's true on the field or off the field. And so, to
yeah,
me, the empathy, it doesn't mean being soft. It means figuring out what's going to drive the best outcome,
that's so
right? So,
yeah,
I'm so sorry I dropped that ball. Okay, are you somebody who's going to respond to realizing, hey, you're better than this? Or there's some people for whom, if you say to them, not that you're better than this, but hey, you let your teammates down, that'll motivate them differently.
yeah,
Or there's some people that'll say, like, don't you want to, be the best that you can be, and that motivates them. So, to me, it's, and I know that I've reframed the question a little bit, but
I don't
it's
know.
about, how do you get, like, the best, to get the best out of people, you got to figure out what actually motivates
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
And that means putting yourself in their shoes, not giving it, like, the best coaching, I think, comes from what's most helpful to you to achieve the outcome, not advice. Because
yeah,
if I could do something the way that someone else, like, thought that I could do something, I would have done it that way anyway, right? Like, if I had that in me, I don't know what my blind spots are, and I'll never see them. They're
yeah.
definitionally blind spots.
My oldest daughter was college volleyball coach for several years, and she told me one time that when she looks at videotape of players that she would be recruiting, she got to the point she said, I don't want to look at their highlight reel. I want to see them after they've made a huge mistake during a play. I want to see how they react in the midst of failure. And I think that's where you can see um, the power of empathy and accountability. So I love the way you frame. You are a framer. You do such a good job of framing these thoughts and these ideas. Let me give you one last question, and then I want to kind of give you the last word. But um, you're seeing every year when the draft comes up, right? You're seeing a influx of these new players, right? And I'm these are um, I these are young men. They're kids. They're younger than my kids' age. So they're at the beginning of their careers. But the question is this: if you could plant one conviction in the hearts of new generations, younger generations of male athletes, and maybe even male fans, like what kind of seed do you want to plant in their hearts of men? You're in a position of influence, in professional sports. Like what do you want to see?
have the courage to speak up when you see that something is wrong. Because the amount of power that the average person has that they don't realize that just by saying something when you see something is wrong, that to me is going to be the needle mover in terms of preventing the conspiracies of silence that have allowed this parade of horribles that we've seen be exposed
Yeah.
over the last decade come through. And don't underestimate what that power is.
Yeah.
And listen, it's uncomfortable, right? We think of courage as coming along with medals, and it doesn't in the beginning. It doesn't always. But that doesn't mean that you don't take that chance, doesn't mean that you don't say something, it doesn't mean that you don't do something, but silence is not neutrality, it's complicity when you're seeing something wrong happen, and
Mm,
have the courage to speak up.
that is great. That is so good. All right. I want to give you the last word. Um, what is hopeful for you right now when you look at the the culture in general, but probably more specifically the culture of men? Where do you see hope?
I see hope in sort of the other side of the coin in my experience, right? So I come here and yes, I'm a woman and I'm wearing a pink sweater with a heart on it. And yes, I work in the NFL and yes, I'm a lawyer. And yes, I listen to heavy metal at times. And when I say all of these things in my mind, none of these are a contradiction. And I want men to have that same experience. I have an older brother who is far kinder than me, loves cooking, works in finance, lives up in New Jersey, has 3 kids, and is a great dad. And both of us can have that can be our lived experience, and it's unremarkable that we may be defying stereotypes one way or the other. And I see hope for everybody in that because I think that then everybody is able to find joy, whatever version that looks like for them. And that's what I want for people. Go find joy, go be happy, and don't worry about what you should be doing or what people say that you should be interested in or what you should like or what kind of car you should drive. Go find what brings you joy and go chase that. And that I think will make everybody happy. I think these rigid bounds of masculinity and femininity are really preventing people from finding true joy for them.
Hmm. Megha Parekh, you are you're wise. You are a wise human, and I'm really grateful for the space you occupy right now. So thank you for taking this time.
Thank you, Tom. It's not often, and this is actually probably the last thing I'll actually leave people with, which is that what a great thing and what a privilege it is to have a platform and a voice that comes from somebody like you opening up the space for it. So thank you for that, Tom. I appreciate it.
Likewise. Thanks.